Turn your camera off. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. It is November 17th, 2021. COVID is still in the game here, so it's a big problem. We had 10 new cases a few days ago. We got another 8 yesterday. So that being said, I've spoken to most of our steering committee, and we've decided to once again forgo our Christmas party. I'm hoping we can do something in the spring here. We definitely need to get some more interaction, people back together again. But we'll see how things look in the spring. So we need some ideas for that. Would be good. Also, we're looking for a new treasurer. Our treasurer can no longer hold the position. He has something going on where he can't do it. So we're looking for a treasurer. So if anybody knows of anyone, and we'll start out with the school districts, and then we'll go to outside vendors if need be.
Hey, I think I've seen Ken Scarletta's hand move when you said that.
Oh, yeah, okay, Ken, so we'll put him down. I'm just kidding, but we are looking for a treasurer if anybody knows of anyone. Our last meeting was held on 10/20/21, and Marty Lamon from Kinetic Fuel Technologies presented on K100. And some of the highlights of that was that his product is all organic. It mixes with water instead of separates the water, so it doesn't push the water to the bottom. He said it mixes with the water and makes it all burn. He said that microbes need water to live, so by using his product in your tanks, your bulk tanks, it suffocates the microbes, which will kill the bacteria, which is good. Shenendehowa and Saratoga were the first customers of K100, which I thought was kind of interesting. Of course, we're going back a few years. The freeze point of K100 is -70 degrees. So probably not going to freeze. Let's see. No harm will be caused by using diesel additive in gas. So the only difference in the gas additive is an octane boost between the gasoline additive and the diesel additive. So it's safe to use for both. And we also learned that Canadian fuel is blended with kerosene, so it's actually already pre-mixed, which I thought was an interesting fact. But today's meeting will be presented by Kodi Shamrock with Leonard Bus Sales, and he will be presenting on disc brakes. And for those of you that just joined, this meeting is being recorded and it's going to be posted to our YouTube channel. So if you do not want to be recorded, please turn your camera off. And that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Kodi.
All right. Morning. Let's see if I can get my screen going here. Bear with me while I fight with this. All right. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. You see just the PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right. So yeah, we've got obviously a pretty small group, so if there's questions, I should be able to answer them. I can't see any of you right now with the screen up, but if you put something in the chat, I can answer it at the end. So I'll go through the air disc brake system. It's a Bendix system. ADB22X is the model name or series name that you've got in the school bus world. They've been out for a long time. It's kind of more recent in our world of things, but again, trucks and motor coaches and so on have had them for a long time. So I estimate there's about 400 ICs on the road in New York State that have the disc brakes. That's roughly, we didn't track it too far back, but last few years we've been keeping track of that. So I'll go through some of the basics of the braking system. There's kind of people on both sides. You've got people that are really pro disc brake and people that are really pro drum or foundation brake. Both have their pros and cons. It's just a matter of, what you're used to and what you're comfortable with trying. So just some of the basic safety stuff, just, follow procedures, don't assume that something if you're not 100% sure. Bendix has a ton of information online on their website. In fact, they recently updated their catalog to a nicer system that allows you to search a little bit easier and kind of break it down better than their old setup that they had. So use that, take advantage of it, and just understand, what you're working on before you touch it, especially with a school bus. So obviously, big differences between air disc and, a foundation drum brake are the actual components themselves. Big thing with drum brakes is that there's a lot of exposed external components. You've got slack adjusters, push rods, and so on. All of these things that collect road junk, basically. The disc brake system is pretty much self-contained. There's really no visible components outside of the chamber and the caliper itself. So just a couple of quick differences there. One of the things that makes disc brakes better, and you can see this in DOT brake stops, is fade performance. So drum brakes in general, as they heat up, obviously the drum gets bigger, which leaves brake fade and causes the shoes to not make contact with the drum. The disc brakes don't have that problem. So you do have less brake fade as brakes heat up. They're more stable, better response time as well. So I do have a video that I'll show you in a second here of the stopping between a drum brake bus and a disc brake bus. But federally, you've got to be able to stop in 280 feet from 60 miles per hour. Drum brakes do that in 28 feet less, and air disc brakes do that in 72 feet less. So you can see there's a big difference in stopping distance there. And that difference between 28 and 72 feet could be, the difference of a car or another vehicle in front of you, potentially. So audio in this video is not important. So if you can't hear anything, that's okay. When I hit play, what you're going to see is the bus on the left has drum brakes, bus on the right obviously has disc. And what they did is they ran, I believe, 30 times around this track and wanted to simulate brakes getting hot throughout a run. So in this particular clip, you'll see, I think, 4 or 5 of those stops kind of spaced out throughout this demonstration. And you can see how the drum brakes, as they get hot, have an increased stopping distance compared to the disc brakes. Are you able to see this okay? Is it playing properly?
Key thing to note is where the orange cones are, where each bus actually is ending, and how the disc brake equipped bus is staying within those orange cones, right, pretty consistently each time. And as the number of stops increases, the drum brake continues to extend. And what's happening here is the drum brake gets hot, the lining material is expanding away from the drum, and that is causing that fade. Where the opposite occurs on the disc brake. As the disc brake gets hot, as it's working, the pad and the rotor continue to make contact, and you're getting that optimum stopping performance each time it brakes.
And Nicole, we did run this, 20 times?
20 times.
Okay. And we're starting at 60 miles per hour?
Yes. Yeah, and so you can see, as we're going to hear, we're almost a full school length longer.
So that gives you an idea just visually of what the stopping comparison is. And I said 30, but it's actually 20 times they went around. But the point is, throughout a morning run, stop and go, your brakes do tend to get hot. So without getting overly technical, some of the benefits are basically just the secured or isolated components inside of the braking system. You don't have as many exposed external parts. Very easy adjustment on these as well. In fact, you can adjust your brakes if you need to with the wheels still on the bus, which is not something that most people have to do, but there are instances where it's nice to be able to check without pulling wheels. Of course, everything is nice and sealed up, as I said. So you can identify, the part number, serial number, and so on the actual brake caliper itself. It's on the side of it there. It's legible for probably the first 5,000 miles until the road gets to it, but it's there for you. It does use a floating caliper design, and it mounts to the axle's anchor plate. So Slightly, or I shouldn't say slightly, I should say very different than a drum brake setup, but very easy to work on. So if you order a brake pad kit for one of these buses, you're going to get everything that you see on the screen here. You've got a retainer bar or clip, adjuster caps, shear adapters, pins, and so on, and then 4 pads. So the kit is the same front and rear. And what I would suggest is if it comes in the kit, it goes on the bus. There's definitely people that want to just add the parts to their parts bin, but if it comes in the kit, it should be put on the bus. Discard the old stuff and don't reuse it. The only thing you might benefit from saving is the shear adapters, because if you drop one down the drain or down in the lift pit and you don't have one, now you've got to rob one from somewhere else. So shear adapters are good to have, and I'll explain how those work in a little bit here. So without, again, getting overly technical, you understand how air brakes work. We put pressure in the chamber. It applies the pads to the rotor in this case, and there's a push rod in there that is sort of acting as the lever. And I do have a good visual here on that in just a second. So I don't know if the visual will actually play properly, but basically the lever will push out and force the pad into the rotor itself. And you can actually see that in the left side there, how the setup is actually arranged in that cutaway there. So with that, again, the caliper is the same thing, front or rear. The only change is whether or not you've got a service or a parking brake or spring brake in there, but everything basically stays the same. The orientation might be a little bit different depending, but it does it's nice to have kind of one common component there. So, and I'm kind of skipping through some of the wordier stuff here just to kind of hit the high points on this. What I will say is if you are going to be working on the system, use common sense, deplete the air where you need to, especially if you're dealing with a spring brake chamber, cage the brake or deplete the air, whatever you have to do to keep yourself safe. I think we're all aware of the dangers of a compressed spring or a spring that engages unexpectedly. So as far as brake adjustment goes, the caliper itself will continue to make automatic adjustments as the bus goes down the road, very similar to a slack adjuster. And as the pads wear down, there's a sort of ratcheting mechanism that is going to force the brakes to stay within adjustment all the time. You can manually adjust the running clearance between the pads and the rotor, and that's something you do when you install them. But again, the bus will on its own kind of keep up with that and make sure that things are aligned the way they should be. So you will, as I said, set that running clearance yourself. It's really simple. When you do the pad change, you can have the pads out and back in probably 2 minutes, aside from pulling the wheel itself. And then it's a matter of just tightening down the adjuster and loosening it off 3 clicks. And that's it for brake adjustment. So it's really a straightforward process. You do have 2 guide sleeves or guide pins that force that caliper to move or allow it to move back and forth. You can check those guide pins, and I'll explain that a little bit as well. Again, there's a lot of kind of wordy stuff here, but I just want to hit the high points and give you an idea of how these disc brakes actually work. So as far as preventative maintenance goes, Bendix designs this with truck in mind and not so much school bus. Most of us have a 30-day or a 45-day PM cycle, or some fleets even have every 1,000 miles. So at that point, you're going to want to pull a wheel and check your brake pads, check your rotors, and just do a visual inspection on there, make sure everything is operational the way it should be. One thing you can do as well is use a thermal heat gun, shine the gun at the caliper after a run and make sure that all of your rotors are relatively close to one another in temperature. And I believe it's supposed to be 50 degrees, no more than 50 degrees difference front to back on the bus. So just something to think about there. Again, always check your pad thickness and your running clearances and so on. And I'll go through some of that with you. With disc brakes, the big question people always have is how long do they last? And the answer to that, like anything, varies, and I can't give you a concrete answer. But it can be, I've heard as low as 5,000. I've heard as high as 25,000. It just depends on the type of driver, the type of roads, the type of engine you have. And engine matters because you don't always have an exhaust brake. If you're running gas buses, you don't have an exhaust brake, you're in the hills, you're relying on those brake pads to do everything. If you have a Cummins engine with an exhaust brake, the brakes may not get as much use in the same way. So there are differences there, of course, but that's the same with anything regionally. So when you're doing disc brake maintenance, if you have to pull the caliper or carrier assembly off, what they don't want you to do is use that retainer bar on top there as a lift point or a pry point, so to speak. That is not intended to be lifting the caliper. It is purely there to hold the brake pads down inside of the brake assembly. So just keep that in mind, that you don't want to use it as a lifting point or, like I said, a pry bar or whatever. So with that, you can check a couple things visually on the actual rotors themselves. So if you look at the graphic on the right, there is a sort of chamfer on the edge of the rotor itself. And what they say is basically once that chamfer is gone from the rotor, you can pretty much assume that it's time to replace it. They are saying usually every 2 to 3 pad changes you're going to be expected to replace the rotor. But again, that is really variable depending on where you are and what kind of drivers you have. I'm that kind of driver that smokes through brakes in a hurry, and my techs hated me, but you've got different types of people out there. So there are, of course, visual checks you can do, but there are going to be technical specifications as well. What a new rotor is and when you should replace it. Same with the pads, like anything. The nice thing is you can do a visual, and that'll give you a pretty good idea right away, what you need to do next. So on the caliper and carrier, there are actually notches cast right into the assembly there. And so if you look at the image on the bottom, you can kind of see there's a circle that shows 2 black lines inside of it. And with that, when those lines finally line up with each other, or they become right in line with each other, that indicates basically that your pads are quite thin and are most likely in need of replacement at that point. So it's sort of a visual quick indicator to say, my pads are getting low, I should probably check them and see, where we're at. And, you can at that point make sure that they're no less than the minimum thickness, or you can just use that as your cue to start replacing pads at that point. There's no sense in trying to squeak an extra 500 miles out of them. So again, just that notch is a really good indicator there. So as far as brake pad inspection, the actual removal of the pads is extremely simple. You're going to pull the spring clip and washer out, slide the pin out, and lift the retainer bar off. And at that point, you can grab the pads by the blue clips on top and slide them out. What I will say is that IC Bus at least does not put any sort of grease or lubricant on the outside where the pad contacts the actual caliper. So when you're getting these buses in, it's not a bad idea to pull them apart and put some in there just to make your life easier later. I'm not sure about the other manufacturers, what they do. Never had an issue getting them out, but sometimes more grease is better than none. So with that, there's, again, the different pad components here. I mentioned the retainer bar. They call it a retention bar here. You've got that blue spring, which is yellow in this picture, and that just kind of holds the pad down in the caliper there. Different points for measurement. They want you to measure at one of the 3 locations there, or all of the locations there. And again, you've got a new pad thickness, what it should be when it's new, and then your minimum pad thickness. Same with your rotor, as you can see on the right side there. So again, most of this is very common sense. One thing that you do want to check for when you pulled your pads out and you're doing a visual inspection is uneven wear end to end. So if you've got, let's say, guide pins that are jamming up and you've got one that's not flowing or moving as freely as it should be, you could have a pad that's getting thinner on one side than the other as that caliper kind of cocks as you're hitting the brakes. So just something to look at there. And then also when you're putting the pads back in after your inspection, make sure that you put them in the same way they came out. So don't flip-flop them, basically, is what they say. Compare also the pads themselves and make sure that they are also worn evenly or very similarly. You shouldn't have one that is extremely thin and one that is practically brand new. That indicates you've got probably a guide pin problem in your caliper. So pad damage, we've all seen disc brakes before, whether it's in a car or bus or whatever. You know what a good pad looks like. If you've got deep grooves and chunks missing, we know that we've got a problem, or worn out pads or defective pads. Use your best judgment there. I think most of us know what a good or bad brake pad looks like at this point. So again, just another look at the kit here. There's an asbestos warning for that. They do have asbestos in them. Just again, be smart, be cautious when you're handling the material. As far as pad and rotor replacement goes, this is everything that you need to do that job. So it's not a terrible process. The pads, as I said, take 2 minutes from the time you have them out to the time you have the new ones in and ready to go and adjusted. When it comes to taking the actual rotor out, of course, there's a little bit more involved with that. You have to pull the wheel bearing, pull the wheel end assembly apart. My take on that is it might sound like a pain, but by the time you're replacing the rotor, you probably should be looking at your wheel ends anyway to make sure that things are, operating the way they should be and nothing is unusually worn out. So these tools will allow you to do that. So I mentioned already on how to actually remove the brake pads. It's very simple. They're going to send you in the brake pad kit 4 rubber caps. You only need 2 of them, so don't drive yourself nuts looking for more because you won't find them. They're 2 different sizes, so just put the one back on that fits best or is the same as what you took off of the bus. There is a shear adapter that is on the back side of the caliper, and I pointed those out earlier. It's a little, very kind of fragile, thin cap that goes on the adjustment nut. And the idea with that is that adapter will break before the caliper does, and that prevents you from over torquing. So make sure that you are inspecting that shear adapter. You can slide it right off and slide a new one back on or reuse it, whatever, depending on what you're doing.
Hey, Kodi, let me just stop you just for a quick second.
Sure.
I see somebody just joined. I just want to let you know that this meeting is being recorded and it's going to be posted to our YouTube channel. So if you don't want to be on the recording, please turn your camera off. All right. Back to you, Kodi.
All right. Thanks, Dan. So again, the process is very simple. Just keep track of your parts. What I will say is if you're trying to pull the pads out and they won't come out, you may have to back off the tappets a little bit. Don't do that without the shear adapter. I think, you'd be surprised when you torque on that, how easily it does break and how easy it would be to over torque or over tighten, your adjuster mechanism and cause damage to it. So just always use that adapter. Like I said, keep extras on hand. You can buy them in a box. I think they come with 10 or 15, or keep the old ones as you pull them off just to have a spare. You'll break them for sure, and you'll drop them at some point, and you know how that goes. It rolls out of the toolbox and it's gone forever. So as far as the actual removal, as I said, you can back that adjuster off a little bit. So on the left side there, you can see the red circle. There's the rubber cap. And when you pull that off, that's where you're going to find that shear adapter. So you'll use a box wrench, 10 millimeter, and basically you'll click and back off that adjuster to free up a little bit of space so you can slide those pads in and out of there. The clicking is a good thing. It means the adjuster is operational. So with that, you want to check now that you've got your pads out that the guide pins are sliding free. So when you grab the actual caliper and slide it back and forth, it has quite a bit of spring to it and it should move easily. It shouldn't make any noise. And that kind of indicates that your guide pins are operating the way they should. There is, of course, a measurement for how much travel there should be there. And I think it's 1 3/4 inches. I can check here in just a second. We talked about the brake pad inspection as well. Take a look at your rotor, look for that chamfer on the edge. If it's gone, your rotor probably needs to be replaced. Again, the guide pins, take a look at those. This one's obvious, but replace brake pads in sets. You don't want low pads on one side, new on the other. I think you guys are all pretty well aware of that at this point. So you will have to back off the tappets to create as much space inside of that caliper as you can. And at that point, you have to sort of assemble the brake pads. So you got to put the blue clip on top, which is kind of a pain. And at that point, you will just drop them down into the caliper assembly itself, and all the other parts are designed just to hold them in. So let's see here. So once you've got those pads in, you'll use that shear adapter, that adjuster again, and you will turn that wrench clockwise until the pads contact the rotor. So basically, you're just snugging it up enough where the pads contact the rotor. And at that point, you will back it off 3 clicks, and that sets your running clearance. So that's as simple as it is. Drop the pads in, tighten up the adjuster till they contact the rotor, and then back off 3 clicks, and you've set your running clearance, and you're good to go, and the bus will do the rest. Really very straightforward. Put a new adjuster cap on, get rid of the old one, or put it in a bin for spare parts if you need one later. At that point, you can put the retainer bar back in, and your pin, and lock your brake pads in, and you're all set. It's really very straightforward. Apply and release the brake a couple times. Make sure that the hub turns properly, and if it doesn't, readjust and try again. So just another look here at the components. You can see how that all goes together. Again, it's really straightforward, very simple to work on. So if you have to remove the caliper, obviously you're going to be pulling off the entire, or I'm sorry, if you have to remove the rotor, you're going to pull the entire caliper and carrier assembly off the anchor plate from the bus. There are 6 bolts that hold that in place, and they are torque to yield, one-time use only. And they will generally not come in the brake kit that you get. So just keep that in mind. The torque spec on those bolts is about 350 to 400 foot-pounds. So again, you're not going to want to reuse those, as they do stretch when you put them in there and install them. So it's a look at the backside here of what those bolts look like. It's really very simple to remove everything. Pull the wheel speed sensor, take the air line off, pull the pads out, and then just start taking the hardware apart, and it'll all start to come apart pretty easily. And it's very straightforward to do it. Just remember, you can't get those bolts back in there. You've got to get new ones with your brake kits. When you put them back on, it's just any cross pattern, nothing too crazy there. But again, you've got 350 to 400 foot-pounds of torque going into those bolts, as obviously they're taking on a lot of stress as you go down the road. So just keep that in mind. As far as the rotor itself, we talked about the thickness. You can, again, check the actual spec, looking for large cracks or strange wear patterns on it, missing sections, things like that. Again, like any car's rotor, you know what a bad rotor looks like and what a good rotor looks like. Just know very large cracks reaching to the edge. You should generally be okay. There are 2 types of rotor installations or mounting setups. We typically use the conventional rotor on our buses, and it's both systems are very simple, but there are some differences. So just make sure you know what you have when you're actually ordering the parts, so that you don't mix and match side to side or end up with something that's different than what you had originally. So once you pull that caliper off, once you pull the brake pads and caliper off, that's where you're going to start to get into, tearing everything down, or rather you've done all that to get the brake pads and caliper off. I apologize. So here's kind of the order of operations on how you do that. You pull the axle seal cap, pull the cotter pin, axle nut cap, pull the axle nut itself, the spacer, the wheel bearing, and so on. Slide everything off. And as I said, that's a really good time to get in there and just do a good inspection on everything and make sure that nothing looks unusual at that point. So as far as the rotor replacement itself, when you mount everything back together, you're looking at 200 to 225 foot-pounds of torque on the bolts that hold the hub assembly directly to the rotor itself. Again, very important that that spec is done correctly. So what Bendix does recommend is that you replace the wheel seal at the same time. If you're pulling things apart, you can damage the seal if you're not careful, you kind of have to give it some motivation to be removed. So you could damage it. Just keep that in mind. If you're going to do this, maybe have some spare parts on the shelf just in case. And really putting it back together is very simple. You just basically do the opposite of what you did to get it off. Keep track of everything, keep everything clean. Torque the axle nut back to 50 foot-pounds and then back it off slightly, just so that it's not overly tightened, and basically lock it all back together. It's very, very straightforward. So as far as guide pins go, I touched on that there is a spec, and I said 1 3/4, but it's actually just about 1 inch. So basically when you grab that caliper and slide it back and forth with no pads inside of it, it should travel about 1 inch front to back. If you find that it won't, you can replace the guide pins technically, but you need a special tool for it, and it may not be worth the effort. At that point, it's almost easier just to replace the caliper itself and not worry about it. But again, every shop is going to be different in how they want to handle that. Again, there's bearings in the guide pin as well. And without getting super technical with the gauge here, I'm going to show you a really simple way to just check the guide pin bearings. Basically put a pry bar between the two halves. You got the carrier on the bottom, the caliper on top, and that should not move when you pry more than 1 millimeter. It's that simple. You don't have to get super technical. If you push on it, it has a very tiny bit of play. Basically, when you move it, if it has a ton of slop or play in it, that tells you your guide pins are worn out and you've got to replace either the pins or the entire caliper at that point. So don't overcomplicate it. Like I said, they want you to use a gauge and all that, but there's easy ways to check very quickly. So you can check the boots, like any caliper. You've got rubber boots on there. Make sure that they're not torn, ripped, whatever. We don't want contaminants getting in there. Of course, you would replace them if you're replacing the guide pins. Just make sure they're in good shape. You know what a good boot would look like in this case. So spring brake or service brake removal, again, it's very straightforward. You've got 2 bolts that mount it to the actual assembly itself. You guys can handle that, I'm pretty sure. Very straightforward design, very simple. So there are a couple things when you put the new chamber back on there. You've got to put a little bit of grease in there just so that you don't have metal on metal contact. Put some grease on the rubber gasket where it meets the actual caliper, or the chamber meets the caliper. Just keep everything clean and neat. Don't introduce anything that shouldn't be there. And then, of course, tighten the nuts down to the proper torque spec, which is about 133 foot-pounds. So there are some notes on the brake seals and thicknesses you should or shouldn't use. What I'll tell you is, because there's a lot to remember here, on the top right of the presentation, you'll see a black box with a service data sheet number in it. If you take and put that service data sheet number into the Bendix document library, it will basically give you everything here that I'm showing you just in a Bendix tech sheet form. So if there's a specific number you want to remember, you can go back and get that sheet. And I can remember to put that number in the chat, or somebody else can do it so you guys can copy it down a little bit later if you'd like. So as far as tappets go, you can replace the rubber boots or the seals on there, but you can't replace the actual tappets themselves. So when you have everything pulled apart, what you want to do is extend those tappets out and make sure that the boots are in good shape and so on, but don't overextend them. If you extend them more than 1 3/4 of an inch, you will basically destroy the caliper at that point, because you've taken it out of sync and you're now replacing it. So be careful, don't overdo it. Pull them out just enough to check, and then, retract them back in using the adjuster. So this is a little concerning, but this was on a school bus, not in New York State, fortunately. Not real sure what was going on there, but you can see that your tappets are, the boots are completely destroyed, fully extended, pad is missing, and one is completely flat, worn down to nothing. Not, again, really sure what happened, but I just thought that you guys might appreciate seeing some of the things that people do out there that are a little concerning. Don't let that be you. Again, this was not in New York State. You guys probably know, but there are many states where the technicians self-certify their own buses, or they have a state trooper come in once a year and check everything, and that's it. New York State is much more stringent, and we wouldn't get away with that. So we're getting toward the end here. One of the other things you'll want to check is your running clearance quick inspection. So this is, you've got your pads back in, retainer bar in, adjustments made. Basically, you're ready to put the wheel back on. At this point, you want to just grab onto the top of the caliper and push it back and forth by hand. And if your running clearance is set properly, you should get a slight movement about the thickness of a nickel, and that will, indicate that your adjustment was done correctly. Once you're sure that's okay, you've done all of the other steps, you can put the wheel back on and take it for a test ride. So you can also use a feeler gauge in there to check between the tappets and the actual back of the pad itself. Just try to, check, make sure your running clearance is correct. Again, you've already done the kind of manual check, but if you want to get really, really particular about it, you can use the feeler gauge to check that gap very accurately. And again, these numbers here, I'm not going to read them all to you because we're not going to remember them, frankly. So the document on the top right will help you with those specifics if you want them later. So again, if the clearance is too great, when you do check it, if you've got more movement than the thickness of a nickel or more movement than 0.6 to 1.1 millimeters, you've got too much of a gap. You could have potentially, no brakes, or you could have brake overheating. We know that brake fires can destroy a school bus pretty quickly. So just make sure your running clearances are in good shape. Take it for a test ride, beat it up a little bit before you give it back to a driver. So adjuster mechanism, this is another test you're going to want to do. And this is not something that you have to do every time you have a PM, but it's probably not a bad idea. And you'll basically take your 10 millimeter box wrench, use a fixed wrench. Don't use a ratcheting style because it'll kind of throw this test off a little bit. You're going to want to put that wrench on the shear adapter and then have somebody in the bus hit the brakes a couple times. And what you should see is that wrench should ratchet forward every time the brake is pressed. And the idea with that is the mechanism is trying to self-adjust, and it's making sure that is actually working. So again, put the wrench on there, have somebody hit the brakes a few times, and make sure that wrench actually clicks forward a little bit. We talked about using the shear adapter. With that, again, it should move freely, and the movement will decrease over time if you do it a bunch. If it doesn't turn at all, or it only turns once, or it just clicks back and forth, you've got a failed adjuster mechanism. So again, this is something that you could technically do with a wheel still on. Not saying it'd be real easy, but you could. And that is a quick check to make sure that your adjuster is working the way it's supposed to be. So some of the problems that you might see, just be over adjustment, brakes that are dragging. Again, if you suspect that they might be, use a thermal gun, check the temperature on those brakes when the driver gets back. If one is super hot, you might have something going on. You want to get in there and run some of those quick checks on them. Under adjustment, again, would be, basically a poor running clearance or bad caliper that's not adjusting to worn pads. Just kind of keep an eye on that sort of thing. Damaged guide pin boots, if they seize, you've all seen calipers seize up before. These are no different. If there's contaminants that get in there, or the brakes get really hot, whatever, and those guide pins seize up, you're going to have potentially brake issues that way. I guess at this point, that's it for the actual presentation part. Does anybody have any specific questions to the brake system? Okay.
Hey, Kodi, when you're how often, you might have said this, how should we be lubing those pins during each PM?
No. So the guide pins technically don't need to be touched. Really, they shouldn't have to be. When you're putting new ones in, you would do a little bit of lubrication, but there's a whole procedure for that I didn't get into. But no, you really don't grease or touch anything for the most part. It's just basically visual movement checks and some technical specs, things like that.
How long does it take to do a brake inspection, a yearly brake inspection on them?
I mean, if you're going to go and pull everything apart, maybe 45 minutes. If you're going to just go in and, check pads, check rotor, check adjustment, you could do all of that in quite honestly, 15 minutes. Once you pull the wheel off, it's very quick to slide everything out, drop it back in, check your specs. It's really very straightforward.
How about the cost? Like if we had to replace a caliper, what is the average cost of one of those?
So I don't know the actual cost of the caliper. That's a good question. I probably should know that answer. But if you were to upgrade to disc brakes, I think it's like a $2,500 upgrade to go to disc brakes, if that gives you any kind of idea, what you're looking at for componentry. I could probably find out, but again, it's going to depend on who you get it from, more than likely.
Hey, anybody on here running them? And if they are, how they like them?
So we've got about 400 units out there in the state that I know of that have disc brakes. I don't know of anybody, they've been out there for probably 3 or 4 years now. I don't know of anybody that has gotten them and then gone back. So that does speak well to it, I think. But again, if you wanted to find somebody in particular that has them, I could get you, some names on who is running them if you wanted to do some homework that way.
Yeah, I'd be interested in like somebody in the Capital District area.
Sure. I don't know them offhand, but I know they're there.
Not Greenville. I don't trust that Scarletta and them Ballard boys.
All right, we'll stay away from them then.
Yeah, and maybe though, if you could get us a couple people that do have it, maybe what we'll do is we'll email to the head mechanic so that people can do some research on their own.
Yeah, I can definitely find a couple. I'm sure there's some out there. I don't know them offhand, but I know they're out there. So.
Yeah. Okay, does anybody have any other questions for Kodi? All right. Well, I want to thank you, Kodi, for your presentation. I think it was very informative. So our next meeting will be held on December 15th, and Roger Herod from Matthews Buses will be presenting on high voltage and safety. So that's all about the electric school buses, some precautions that we shall be taking as these electric buses begin entering our fleets. Again, let me know if you have any thoughts on maybe a summer party or something, due to this will be the second year that we're not going to have a Christmas party. Our ASE account has been set up. So what we're going to do is we're going to have each shop, if you have people that you want to nominate for, do you think is, have gone above and beyond, they come to work every day, they're good employees, you want to see your shop with a few people that are master certified in school bus repair, we are going to pay for that. The account's been set up. I will email George Gill will be the contact for this. We're going to send, you can send your nominations to him, and we will go through the selection process. Once a year, we'll select 2 people, and we'll pay for that through the head mechanics. And over the years, we're going to pay to maintain that as well. So, and we'll get into this a little bit more as we get some people that are selected. They will have to open up their own ASE account under their own personal name and then link it to ours. And I'll go through how to do all this as we get some candidates in here. And that way we can pay for it. So start thinking about people in your shop that you think are worthy or are a good candidate that you would like to see become master school bus certified. My goal here is we'll have a bunch of people in the Capital District that are master certified at all of our school districts.
Hey, Dan, real quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I've got a couple districts here or a few districts I can name for you guys if you'd like for disc brake. I'm just kind of looking while you're talking.
Sure.
Okay. So, I mean, some of these may be first time disc brake, but I have, give you an idea, Schuylerville, Mayfield, Broad Albin, don't know how to say that, sorry. Salem, Hudson Falls, Oppenheim, Ballston Spa, Averill Park, Ichabod, Gloversville, Voorheesville, Queensbury, Hadley, Luzerne. So they're out there. Mayfield, Rotterdam, Fort Plain, Greater Johnstown, Corinth, Mechanicville, you get the idea. So there's plenty out there that are running them. Be pretty easy to find somebody that can give you that information if you want it.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, that definitely will be helpful.
You got it.
Yep. And the other thing I want to mention is our summer seminar is still scheduled to be in person July 21st, 2022 at the On Center in Syracuse. I spoke to the New York chapter and it's still a go. And again, before we close the meeting, don't forget about the treasurer position. If anybody knows anybody, I'd like to put somebody in so we don't fall behind here. That being said, does anybody have anything else to add to today's meeting? If not, we'll close today's meeting. And like I said, this meeting will be posted to our YouTube channel. So if you'd like to refer back to Kodi's presentation or any of the presentations previous to this one, feel free to do so. And with that being said, I will close today's meeting. I want to thank everybody for coming.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, happy
Thanks, Kodi.
Thanksgiving.